Darkness cloaked the mountains of Mikawa province, broken only by the flicker of pine torches carried by men moving in silence. It was the mid-16th century, an age when Japan tore itself apart in endless civil war. The Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period, was a crucible of ambition and betrayal. Clans rose and fell with breathtaking speed, their leaders carving dominions with fire and steel. Among them walked a figure whispered about more than spoken of, a man whose name would one day blur the line between samurai and shadow, between myth and history. His name was Hattori Hanzō. He was born in 1542, the son of Hattori Yasunaga, a samurai of the Matsudaira clan in Mikawa. From beginning, the boy's path was marked not by ease but by expectation. In a world where loyalty was currency and failure meant annihilation, a child carried the burdens of bloodline. The Matsudaira clan, later destined to be known as the Tokugawa, lived in constant peril, hemmed in by the powerful Imagawa to the east and the ferocious Oda to the west. In that storm of uncertainty, Hanzō was trained not simply to fight, but to survive. From an early age, he was sent to Mount Kurama near Kyoto, a place famed for ascetic training in swordsmanship and strategy. There, under the watchful eyes of monks and warriors alike, the boy forged himself into steel. His training was merciless. Long runs of mountain paths, endless practice with the spear, and hours of meditation in frigid streams. By the time he was 12, Hanzō was no ordinary child. He had mastered techniques that broke stronger men, and had learned to fight not only with his body but with patience, deception, and timing. His enemies would later call him Oni no Hanzō, Hanzō the demon, not for cruelty, but for his uncanny ability to strike from nowhere and vanish without a trace. At the age of 16, his reputation already preceded him. During one of the countless skirmishes between the Matsudaira and the Imagawa, young Hanzō led a small band of warriors in a night raid across the Kamino River. With silent precision, they slipped past sentries and struck deep into enemy lines, killing a commander before the Imagawa even understood what had happened. The raid was reckless. Some said suicidal, but it succeeded. The legend of Hattori Hanzō began not with a command of armies, but with the daring of a youth who understood the battlefield as a place where shadows were as deadly as swords. The Sengoku era was a time when the boundaries between samurai and ninja blurred. The word ninja itself was seldom spoken. Men of stealth were often called shinobi. They were spies, saboteurs, masters of infiltration. For a son of Mikawa like Hanzō, raised among the Iga and Koga regions where shinobi arts thrived, such methods were not dishonorable but essential. His skill with the spear was matched by his mastery of unconventional warfare, ambushes, disguises, and psychological intimidation. It was his dual nature, both samurai and shinobi, that set him apart. He could lead openly on the battlefield or vanish into the night to strike unseen. That made him indispensable. As Japan bled, a man emerged whose fate would intertwine with Hanzō's. Tokugawa Ieyasu, then known as Matsudaira Motoyasu. Ambitious yet cautious, Motoyasu sought survival above all. His clan had long been pawns of greater powers, but he dreamed of independence. To achieve it, he needed men who could do more than fight. He needed men who could think like predators, anticipate danger, and protect him from the treacherous world around him. He found such a man in Hattori Hanzō. Their bond was forged in blood and loyalty. Hanzō became Motoyasu's protector, commander, and shadow. When the clan's fortunes shifted, when alliances turned to traps, when betrayal threatened to consume them, it was often Hanzō who carved a path through chaos. His presence gave courage to allies and fear to enemies, and his loyalty, once pledged, was unshakable. But loyalty was tested most brutally in 1563, when the Iko-Iki, militant followers of the Jodo Shinshu sect, rose in rebellion across Mikawa. The Iko-Iki were not samurai but commoners, peasants, and monks bound by faith, armed with desperation and sheer numbers. They were a force that even hardened warriors feared. Their revolt tore through Motoyasu's domain, and for the young lord, survival seemed uncertain. The war against the Iko-Iki was not a noble duel between samurai. It was a brutal struggle of attrition, fire, and massacre. Hanzō distinguished himself in this crucible. He fought with relentless ferocity, not only on open fields but in the dark alleys where ambushes waited. His raids disrupted supply lines, His strategies outmaneuvered larger forces. Again and again, his courage turned despair into resilience. The people began to whisper his name with awe. To his enemies, he was a phantom. To his allies, a shield. For Moroyasu, he was becoming something more than a warrior. He was becoming indispensable to destiny itself. The rise of Oda Nobunaga soon reshaped the entire landscape of Japan. With fire and gunpowder, Nobunaga crushed rivals and shattered traditions. His alliance with Moroyasu transformed the Matsudaira into the Tokugawa, elevating their chances of survival. Yet alliances in the Sengoku period were fragile things, easily broken by ambition. Nobunaga demanded absolute loyalty, and those who defied him paid in rivers of blood. For Moroyasu to navigate this peril, he would need Hanzō more than ever. It was in the shadows of this alliance that Hanzō's greatest test began. His skills would not only be used to fight battles, but to protect his master from betrayal, assassination, and the shifting tides of power. He would become a blade in the dark, the strategist in silence, the man who ensured that Tokugawa Ieyasu lived long enough to claim the future that awaited him. Yet the road ahead was paved with treachery, and Hanzō's loyalty would soon face a trial that could destroy everything he swore to protect. For in the coming years, a massacre would erupt that would leave Ieyasu trapped behind enemy lines, his family in peril, and his life hanging by a thread. Only one man could carve a path through the chaos, and that man was Hattori Hanzō. The year was 1582, and Japan trembled under the sudden shock of betrayal. Oda Nobunaga, the fearsome warlord who had crushed so many rivals, was dead, forced to take his own life at Hanō-ji after the treachery of his vassal Akechi Mitsuhide. The balance of power shifted in an instant. For Tokugawa Ieyasu, then in the heart of hostile territory near Sakai, the news struck like a thunderclap. He was deep inside Oda lands with only a small retinue, exposed and vulnerable. Every road was watched, every alliance uncertain. Mitsuhide's rebellion threatened to swallow him whole. It was here that Hattori Hanzō's loyalty and cunning became the difference between life and death. With enemy patrols closing in and the countryside erupting into chaos, Ieyasu faced annihilation. To survive, he had to return to Mikawa, but the path home was blocked by the mountains of Iga, a region infamous for its fierce independence and its warriors of the shadows, the Iga shinobi. Just a few years earlier, Oda Nobunaga had unleashed fire and steel upon Iga in the infamous Tensho Iga War, slaughtering thousands and devastating their villages. The survivors had no reason to trust outsiders, least of all those allied with Nobunaga's circle. But Hanzō was no stranger to Iga. His family roots traced back to that land of shinobi, and his reputation carried weight even among its battered survivors. It was he who persuaded them to guide Ieyasu through the treacherous mountain passes, evading enemy patrols and deadly ambushes. With their help, and under Hanzō's unerring leadership, Ieyasu's small band slipped like ghosts through the Iga terrain. The journey became legendary, a desperate flight through forests and ravines, every step shadowed by death. Men fell behind, enemy scouts prowled the ridges, but still Hanzō pressed forward, leading his lord by night and concealing him by day. At one critical moment, when an enemy detachment closed in, Hanzō orchestrated an ambush in the dense undergrowth. Striking with precision, his men cut down the pursuers and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. It was not brute strength, but silence and surprise that carried them through. By the time Ieyasu emerged safely into his own territories, his survival was owed to the demon of Mikawa. Without Hanzō, Tokugawa's destiny might have ended in the forests of Iga, and Japan's history would have taken another course entirely. Yet survival came at a cost. The Tensho Iga War had left deep scars on the land and its people, and Hanzō never forgot the devastation he had witnessed. To him, the lessons of Iga were etched in fire. Survival depended not only on courage but on cunning, not only on honor but on adaptation. These were the qualities he embodied, and they would define the future of the Tokugawa clan. As the years advanced, the storm of the Sengoku era grew fiercer. Hideyoshi Toyotomi rose to avenge Nobunaga's death, defeating Akechi Mitsuhide at Yamazaki and claiming power across Japan. For Tokugawa Ieyasu, this meant submission, at least outwardly. Ieyasu knew patience. He bowed when needed, but he never abandoned his ambition. Through it all, Hanzō remained his shadow, guarding him from assassination, commanding his warriors in battle, and weaving fear into the hearts of those who might threaten him. Hanzō's fame grew not only for his loyalty, but for his mastery of the spear. He was a formidable battlefield commander, and his reputation spread across provinces. Tales abounded of his uncanny ability to appear where least expected, of his ruthlessness in pursuit, and of his unshakable discipline. Some said he could move faster than the eye could follow. Others swore he communed with spirits, striking with the wrath of the underworld. These were myths born of fear, but they cloaked him with the aura of the supernatural, a weapon as powerful as any blade. But beneath the legends lay the unrelenting reality of war. The Sengoku age devoured men, no matter how skilled, and loyalty was a chain as heavy as iron. Hanzō carried that chain willingly, but it bound him to Ieyasu's choices that grew heavier with each passing year. When Toyotomi Hideyoshi's power became unassailable, Ieyasu bent the knee, biding his time in the shadows of a man whose ambition rivaled Nobunaga's. For Hanzō, this meant vigilance, for enemies lurked even within supposed alliances. The true test of his spirit came not on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments of treachery and survival. In 1590, during Hideyoshi's siege of Odawara against the Hojo clan, Ieyasu's political position shifted once again. Hideyoshi rewarded him with vast lands in the Kanto region, uprooting him from his ancestral Mikawa and placing him in a new domain. It was a gamble, new lands, new retainers, and the constant risk of rebellion. For Ieyasu to secure this fragile future, he relied more than ever on the loyalty of men like Hanzō. And then came tragedy. In the midst of these political storms, Ieyasu's own family became entangled in suspicion. His son, Matsudaira Nobuyasu, fell under accusations of plotting treason. Whether true or not, the pressure from Nobunaga in earlier years had forced Ieyasu to condemn his own blood. Nobuyasu was compelled to commit seppuku in 1579. Hanzō, known for his steel resolve, refused to serve as executioner for the young man he had once sworn to protect. Though he remained loyal to Ieyasu, that refusal revealed the depth of his humanity, a moment where the demon of Mikawa bared his soul. The years that followed pulled Hanzō further into the machinery of survival and war. By the turn of the century, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was dead, and the vacuum of power reopened old rivalries. Ieyasu seized his moment, preparing to challenge the Toyotomi loyalists who clung to power in Osaka. The fate of Japan once more balanced on the edge of a blade. Hanzō's role shifted now from warrior to guardian of the Tokugawa household. He commanded men, oversaw defenses, and above all ensured the survival of his lord in the treacherous chessboard of politics. Yet his enemies did not forget him, and his reputation as Oni-no Hanzō made him a target as much as a shield. The shadows lengthened over Japan as alliances hardened into lines of battle. The decisive conflict approached, the one that would determine whether the land would ever know peace, or drown in endless war. For Tokugawa Ieyasu to triumph at the coming showdown, every loyal retainer would need to stand firm, and among them, none cast a longer or darker shadow than Hattori Hanzō. The year was 1600. Armies gathered. The storm of Sekigahara loomed, the greatest battle in Japanese history. And at the heart of it, Hanzō prepared to face the fate that would decide not only his lord's destiny, but the future of Japan itself. The morning mist of October 21st, 1600, hung heavy over the fields of Sekigahara. Drums thundered, banners snapped in the wind, and nearly 160,000 men prepared to decide the fate of a fractured nation. On one side stood Tokugawa Ieyasu and his eastern army. On the other, the western coalition led by Ishida Mitsunari, loyal to the Toyotomi clan. It was not merely a battle for territory. It was a reckoning, a struggle to determine who would rule Japan. For Hattori Hanzō, the moment was less about glory than about survival. His task was not to lead the vanguard into glorious combat, but to ensure that Ieyasu lived to claim victory. He commanded the IGA warriors, shinobi whose skills in infiltration, sabotage, and reconnaissance gave the Tokugawa an advantage that brute numbers alone could not. Hanzō and his men scouted the enemy positions, disrupted supply lines, and spread misinformation that sowed doubt within the western ranks. Their work was unseen, but it tilted the balance of battlefield before the first arrow was loosed. The clash erupted with a roar of gunfire and the crash of steel. As soldiers surged into the killing grounds, betrayal reshaped the tide. Several of the Western commanders, secretly aligned with Ieyasu, turned their banners mid-battle. Confusion and panic tore through Mitsunari's army. The fields became a slaughterhouse, mud and blood mingling beneath the boots of tens of thousands. Ieyasu's forces pressed forward relentlessly, and as the sun burned away the mist, victory fell to the Tokugawa. Hanzō's presence, though not at the center of the carnage, was critical. He ensured the safety of the Tokugawa camp, watched for assassins, and directed his shinobi to hunt down stragglers who might regroup into threats. His reputation as Oni no Hanzō was not born of fantasy. It was built on the cold efficiency with which he erased dangers before they could blossom. When the dust of Sekigahara settled, Tokugawa Ieyasu stood as the unchallenged master of Japan. The path to the shogunate lay open, yet victory carried a price. The battlefield was littered with the dead, men whose loyalty had been bought, betrayed, or broken. Hanzō had seen it all before, but even for him, Sekigahara was a grim reminder that destiny was carved from corpses. He served without question, but deep within, the burden of endless killing etched itself into his soul. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu was formally appointed shogun, bringing centuries of civil war to an end and beginning the Tokugawa shogunate, a regime that would rule Japan for over 250 years. For Hanzō, it was the culmination of a lifetime of loyalty. He had guarded his lord through rebellion, treachery, exile, and war. Now Japan knew peace, or at least a semblance of it. But peace was a different kind of battlefield. The skills that had kept Ieyasu alive in the chaos of war were now turned toward the discipline of governance and order. Hanzō was entrusted with the security of Edo Castle, the seat of Tokugawa power. His warriors became part of the castle guard, the eyes and ears of the shogunate. From the shadows, he maintained the stability that Ieyasu had fought so long to achieve. Yet the demon of Mikawa was not invulnerable. In 1596, years before Sekigahara, his wife and children had been taken hostage during a skirmish, a reminder that even the fiercest warrior could not shield those he loved from the cruelties of the Sengoku world. Though his family was eventually restored to him, the wound of that humiliation never fully healed. Hanzō's life was marked by service and sacrifice, but seldom by personal joy. By the early 1600s, Hanzō began to withdraw from the field. He was no longer the reckless youth who crossed rivers in midnight raids or led ambushes in mountain passes. Time had hardened him, but it had also slowed him. Responsibility replaced daring, and his role became that of a guardian elder. His men revered him not only for his victories, but for the steadiness with which he carried the weight of duty. Still, danger did not vanish with the dawn of peace. Discontent simmered beneath the surface of Tokugawa rule, and enemies remained. Hanzō's vigilance never wavered, for he knew that shadows could strike as suddenly as they always had. In 1597, he had built a temple in Edo for the souls of fallen Ij warriors, a place of remembrance and prayer. It was a glimpse into the depth of the man beneath the legend, a warrior who carried death upon his hands, but who sought to give peace to those who had perished in loyalty. By 1605, Tokugawa Ieyasu had retired from the title of shogun, passing it to his son Hidetada while maintaining power from behind the scenes. For Hanzō, this transition marked the closing of an age. His service, once demanded by chaos, was now sustained by a duty to the dynasty he had helped create. But fate is unrelenting. In 1596, he had already tasted personal loss. In the years after Sekigahara, he would face it again. The man once known as Oni no Hanzō began to fade into the twilight of his life. Though his name still inspired fear and reverence, he was no longer the phantom in the dark, but an elder watching the world he had fought to shape. And then in 1597, death struck, not on the battlefield, not at the hand of an assassin, but quietly in Edo. The exact cause remains uncertain. Some sources say illness, others an accident in the Kanda River, but the demon of Mikawa was gone. He was only 55 years old. The temple he had built, Seininji, became his resting place, and within it lies a spear, a relic of a man who blurred the line between myth and reality. Yet even in death, his shadow lingered. His descendants continued to serve the Tokugawa shogunate as samurai and shinobi, carrying his name into future generations. Edo Castle's gate was named Hanzō in his honor, a reminder that the city itself was guarded by the spirit of the man who had once protected its founder. But though his life had ended, his legacy was only beginning. His name would not remain confined to history books. It would pass into folklore, into plays, into popular culture, and in time, Hattori Hanzō would become not just a man of history, but a symbol of the shadowed warriors who shaped Japan. Yet the question lingers, how does one measure the life of a man who lived half in the light of samurai honor and half in the darkness of shinobi stealth? Was Hattori Hanzō a demon, or was he something far more human, a man shaped by chaos, bound by loyalty, and consumed by the destiny of his lord? The answer lies in the final act of his legacy, and how his name continued to haunt Japan long after his death. For though Hattori Hanzō's body was laid to rest, the shadow of Oni no Hanzō never truly faded, and in the decades that followed, that shadow would become legend. In the years after his death, the memory of Hattori Hanzō refused to fade. His grave at Seininji Temple in Edo became a site of reverence, where warriors and commoners alike came to pay respects to the man who had walked the razor's edge between loyalty and death. His spear was enshrined there, a weapon that had once pierced through darkness and despair. The gate leading into Edo Castle bore his name, Hanzō, a permanent reminder that the very heart of Tokugawa power had once been shielded by his vigilance. For the Tokugawa shogunate, his family remained invaluable. His descendants continued to serve as bannermen, shinobi, and protectors of the shogunate's inner circles. The Hattori clan held authority over groups of IGA warriors in Edo, ensuring that the arts of stealth and intelligence gathering remained woven into the fabric of Tokugawa rule. In this way, Hanzō's bloodline became inseparable from the stability of a regime that would endure for 2.5 centuries. His shadow stretched across generations, binding his name to the very foundations of Japan's longest-lasting government. But beyond the halls of power, his story took on a life of its own. The common people, who had lived in fear during the Sengoku chaos, retold his exploits as legends. In their voices, Hanzō became more than a man. He became a phantom. Some swore he could walk on water, others that he could control fire or command spirits of the underworld. To peasants and villagers, these tales were not lies but ways of understanding a man whose skills seemed impossible, whose loyalty seemed unbreakable, whose presence seemed unearthly. The name Oni no Hanzō became both a warning and a blessing, invoked to inspire courage or to terrify enemies. As centuries passed, the image of Hattori Hanzō transformed further. The strict codes of the Tokugawa era, where peace was enforced at the edge of the sword, elevated him into a cultural archetype, the perfect blend of samurai honor and shinobi cunning. Plays and stories portrayed him as the ultimate retainer, the demon who lived and died for his master. In these tales, fact and fiction fused, until a man who had once bled and suffered became indistinguishable from the myth that surrounded him. His legacy also reveals the paradox of Japan's history. The Sengoku Jidai was an age of chaos, yet forged men whose loyalty and skill laid the foundations of centuries of peace. Hanzō embodied this contradiction. He was both destroyer and protector, both shadow and light. He waged war without mercy, yet built temples for the souls of the fallen. He killed without hesitation, yet refused to stain his hands with the blood of his Lord Sun. He was feared as a demon, yet remembered as a guardian. The Tokugawa shogunate itself eventually fell in the mid-19th century, swept away by the winds of modernity and the arrival of Western powers. But even as Edo became Tokyo, as samurai laid down their swords, the memory of Hanzō endured. The gate that bore his name still stands today as a landmark of modern Tokyo, a silent sentinel to a man who died more than 4 centuries ago. Travelers passing through Hanzō cannot help but carry his shadow with them, whether they know it or not. In modern times, his legend has leapt far beyond Japan. His name has appeared in novels, films, and even global popular culture. To some, he is the archetypal ninja master, cloaked in black, moving through darkness with supernatural power. To others, he is the loyal samurai who sacrificed everything for Tokugawa Ieyasu. Each retelling reshapes him. Yet the core, the truth remains. Hattori Hanzō was a man who defined an age. What made him endure was not sorcery, but his humanity. He lived in an era where betrayal was as common as breath. Yet he never abandoned his lord. He fought in a world where death was certain, yet he carved out survival with a mixture of steel and cunning. His genius was not that he was superhuman, but that he pushed human loyalty, skill, and discipline to their furthest edge. That is why his name has survived when so many others were lost to time. The Sengoku era gave birth to countless warlords and warriors, yet only a handful live on in the modern imagination. Nobunaga, Hideyoshi Ieyasu, the three unifiers, stand as giants of power, but Hanzō, though never a ruler, claimed immortality of another kind. His immortality lies not in titles or lands, but in legend, a gate, a grave, a spear, and a shadow that refuses to fade. When we speak his name today, we do not summon a demon, but the memory of a man who lived in fire and walked through blood to guard the dream of his master. He died long before the Tokugawa shogunate reached its height, yet without him, it might never have been born. Hattori Hanzō was not just a warrior. He was a blade in the dark, the guardian at the gate, the shadow that ensured a dynasty. His life was forged in war, but his legacy was peace. And though centuries have passed, the demon of Mikawa still watches, through memory, through myth, through the whispered stories that keep his name alive. The battlefield has long fallen silent. The Sengoku warlords are dust, their castles crumbled, their banners rotted away. But in the silence, one name still echoes: Hattori Hanzō. A man, a demon, a legend,